Paul Butler and Charlie Dent, former Republican congressman from Pennsylvania. That was very emotional. Oh, my gosh. Why can't they just bring them back, Charlie? What is going on?
Well, look, it's become more complicated than it needs to be because this gentleman is now down in El Salvador. The court has ordered that he be returned. We just saw that the president of El Salvador yesterday said he wasn't going to return him. So I'm not sure, and this is where our legal expert might have some guidance, I'm not sure how we will compel a foreign head of state to release one of his own citizens back to the United States. I agree, this man was denied due process. He should not have been deported in the first place. But we're in a weird spot here.
I mean, it's just so Paul Butler. The DHS secretary was literally in this very prison not a couple weeks ago. And it's not lost on me that, the president of the United States is saying that he can, make China and every world power, large or small, bend to his will when it comes to the economy. But he can't tell the El Salvadoran dictator to bring somebody back. That being said, the Atlantic today writes that the constitutional crisis is here. This is what Adam Serra wrote. This is a quote from there. The Trump administration is defying a Supreme Court order to retrieve a man it marooned in a gulag abroad while pretending to comply with it. What could it do to him? It could do to anyone. More significantly, if the Trump administration can defy court orders with impunity and Congress is unwilling to act, there is no reason for it to respect the constitutional rights of American citizens either. The Roberts Court will now have to decide whether to side with the Constitution or with a lawless president asserting the power to disappear people at will. This is not a power that any person, much less an American president, is meant to have. I mean, I keep asking everyone, are we in a constitutional crisis?
We are in a constitutional crisis.
Why?
Because the Supreme Court is being openly defied by the President of the United States. What does it take to bring this man home? What it takes is for the President to tell the President of El Salvador to bring him home. We all saw that love fest yesterday in the Oval Office between those two men. If Trump asked, it would happen. But instead, they're pretending. So the Homeland Security Secretary, the Attorney General of the United States says, well, all the Supreme Court said is that we have to do what we can here. So she says, if he can somehow make his way to the airport, then we'll spring for the flight home. That's defiance. That's not what the Supreme Court says. They know that. And when they send lawyers to make these ridiculous arguments that don't pass a laugh test, that's not saying to the Supreme Court, hey, we're not going to do what you want in those words, but it's open defiance.
I had Senator Chris Van Hollen from Maryland on last night, and obviously Senator from Maryland, he said that if he could not get a meeting with President Bukele, he was going to go to El Salvador. He didn't get his meeting. He says he's going to El Salvador on Wednesday he wants access to the prison. He wants to check on Kilmar Abrego Garcia's condition. There have now since been a number of Democrats who have said, we want to join him. I talked to a lot of White House reporters today who said, it's so crazy. Trump is in the toilet on the economy, but he's up on immigration, but Democrats want to take an exodus to El Salvador. But this is what was happening to Chuck Grassley in a town hall in Iowa just this afternoon. Take a listen.
Are you going to bring that guy back from El Salvador? Yeah. Why not?
Well, because that's not a power of Congress.
The Supreme Court said to bring him back.
Judges are.
Yeah, but
What can they do?
He's defined the
You're on the Judiciary Committee.
Trump don't care.
If I get an order to pay a ticket for $1,200 and I just say no, does that stand up? Because he's got an order from the Supreme Court and he's just said no.
Yeah. He just said screw it.
the president of that country is not subject to our U.S. Supreme Court.
If Trump wanted to bring him back, bring him back. I'm pissed.
And in fact, the judge says, is this not the core of what the plaintiffs are currently asking for, which is this kind of judicial investigation through discovery, and to get some answers, and in a certain sense lay the groundwork for understanding what the government could do and what the government is or is not doing.
Could this case, or does this case necessarily need to end up back at the Supreme Court? And if it does, does the Supreme Court need to be, I guess I keep describing it as like a little less vague in its wording this next time? What do you think?
I think it'll end up at the Supreme Court regardless, because the Trump administration is going to try to bring it there, they maybe try to bring it there very early. In fact, saying that some of this issue of discovery and the questions being asked shouldn't be asked. So maybe they try to do that. But the Supreme Court already basically said these are the things that they need to answer to. So they could try that, but I don't think it'll die fast. And then the last one will be if she does, in fact, the district court judge, hold them in contempt. I think one of the most important parts of the order that she gave this evening is she actually points to one of the ways in which the United States government seems to have control over the matter. She says it's inexplicable that Abrego Garcia is still being held in CCOT. And then she drops a footnote and cites the text that we do have from the written agreement with El Salvador that's being released by the Associated Press because they obtained part of the agreement, which says that they'll be holding CCOT, quote, pending the United States decision on their long-term disposition, end quote. That's what the judge says, which is basically saying you have much more authority, the United States government, to do something here, to do anything, take certain steps to facilitate his release.
Then you're playing at. Then you're saying that you have had, and because they keep saying that their hands are tied, they can't do anything about it. One aspect of this that is
professionally to navigate, even with people in our lives who are educated people who read the news, people who are plugged in, is just. When you're paying attention every moment, it's hard to convey how bad it is, what they are trying to do.
Yes.
And then there's this gap, this sort of alienating gap between what their aspirations are, which truly are like apocalyptically bad in my humble opinion. And then just like the fact that we're all, you go get coffee, you pick up your kid, you're on vacation. Like it's normal. And I'm wondering how you sort of are thinking about navigating that as someone who is, an elected representative of the people of Minnesota, someone who talks to people and tries to sort of, communicate.
Yeah. Well, you want to be a calming presence. Look, I've done this through a global pandemic. I did it through the unrest of George Floyd. And you want to convey factual information and you want to normalize. Your first segment couldn't have been more spot on. I've been using, and I made this statement at one time, the road to authoritarianism is littered with people telling you you're overreacting. I have had hair on fire for a while, and I know there's, we can't swing at everything. He's just out there flooding the zone to distract you from the real stuff he's doing. I have come to understand what Donald Trump, what pops into his head and he says, he's going to carry it out. Once again, he talked about the tariffs. He talked about, he's going to deport people. And this whole thing with Mr. Abrego Garcia, it's that old wisdom and terrifying is if you're not speaking up for this man, there will be no one left to speak up for you. Whether it's Chris Krebs that they're going after for simply I know Chris Krebs. He's a Republican. He was there to provide election security in 2020. He did it, and all he said was it was a fair election. They're coming. They're going to do this. So I think the biggest thing is I'm convinced now he's not going to listen to the courts. And I've been saying there is a finer firewall, and it's the people. That's why these rallies, that's why these town halls, that's why this engagement, it's not meant to scare people. It's meant to empower people, because I will tell you what, Republican members of Congress are not afraid of the people. They're afraid of Donald Trump. They are starting to become afraid of the people. That's why they're not doing these town halls. They need to be afraid and come forward. I was a member of Congress. You need to stand in front of them and say why gutting the VA makes sense. Why did you allow an unelected official like Elon Musk be able to take away Social Security, to be able to get that data? So I think what's happening, Chris, is that it's not about terrifying people. It's about just simply and very calmly showing them they are headed towards this. Donald Trump has said it. What terrifies me is he has talked in the past about nuclear war being winnable. He thinks the tariffs, and you think that's terrifying? Look what he talks about. And if he says it, he plans on doing it.
Yeah, just to clarify, and I know you mean this because of the times we live in, you mean politically afraid of the people as opposed to physically afraid of the people, which is an important distinction. Given the world we live in. I know you mean that. I just want to be very clear about that.
Well, yeah, I appreciate you clarifying that, because I will guarantee you that clip is already on Fox News to try and say the radicalness is coming from the Democrats. It's being afraid of the people speaking their mind to them. They're afraid of the voters voting them out because they voted for these bad things. But they are more terrified that Donald Trump will say something about them or primarying them. And I don't know what it is about these people clinging to these jobs. The job of a congressman is a privilege, but it ain't the greatest job in the world. And I don't know why you're giving up your dignity the responsibility you have to hold that job. But you're right. They think that they can disrespect the voters, and that's the feeling I got in these town halls. Don't disrespect us. Come and ask questions. And just to be clear, I did one in Texas, and there was a gentleman there that was opposed to vaccines. And he stood up and asked his question and said that. And I responded that, the research shows that. You've got measles in Texas. We should be addressing them. But it's not. These are folks that just want to be heard, even though their issues weren't agreeing with mine. So I don't know. This is the time to do this. I'm going to thank all the people who are out there, all the people. And you just had Senator Van Hollen, who there's nobody better. He has to speak up for his constituent because they do plan. If they think they can get away with this, they will press it further.
You've given some interviews about the 2024 campaign, and I think all of us have a kind of things are so bad right now that allergy to too much retroactive, thinking. But I did want to follow up on one thing where you talked about some of the mistakes you thought the campaign made. One of them was sort of failing in outreach to Latino voters, which I think is borne out by the data. Not speaking enough, just being a little too cautious, which I think I agree with too. You talked about the unpopular stance of the Biden administration on Gaza. And I want to just ask about whether you think that campaign, the Harris-Walz campaign, should have made a more decisive substantive policy break with the administration's policy on Gaza.
Look, I think retroactively, Chris, you could put it into more of a context. I think going back to July and watching when decisions were being made so quickly, the question was, would there be a primary? Time didn't have it. The threat was real. I think being able to clearly articulate, as I think the vice president was doing wonderfully around things like home care for using Medicare or
Trump is trying to put on a charade. We know that what he's effectively doing is disobeying the judge. We know that. But he's trying to do the rigmarole where he says, oh, we're trying to get this guy back. It was a mistake. We pinky square. But now there's all these jurisdictional issues because he's in a different country and blah, blah, blah. And there's sovereign, blah, blah. It's all BS. And the judge knows it because even if these arguments had merit, even if at the end of the day, the BS that Trump and his team are spewing live inside a courtroom, the Trump administration, live inside a courtroom, your tax dollars paying for Trump's team to be in that room, lying to you, the people, on your dollar, saying basically we're trying all these things and it's not working. When the judge is basically saying, I don't believe you, you're being contemptuous, or at least that's the direction the judge is leaning, because I don't actually think you're doing anything. The work that you say you're doing to kind of prove that you're doing your due diligence, that, the government has to prove that it's meaningfully trying to adhere to a court order, the judge is saying that you're not doing that. And that's incredibly troubling because as Tim Walz notes there, they're very clearly lining up to make it explicit. They've made it implicit, but now they're going to make it explicit that we're not going to listen to the court. I talked about this earlier. This is the Andrew Jackson moment where Trump goes to the Supreme Court and he's going to say it quietly and code it at first, but eventually say it out loud when he's ready and when he's backed into a corner. You and what army? Because the way the United States works is that the Supreme Court is a separate and equal branch, but ultimately they don't have an army. So they can tell Trump what to do, but he could go full fascist and just ignore them. And that's the way we're heading.